you. Thank you. Might knock on the table or something.
Yes, just let me know. I usually,
Oh, you do. So
well, I've
I
been
think it's a quarter to five.
it's a quarter to five, just
Yeah.
or to four just now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
we aim to
we
start
stop at quarter to five.
five.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've been a university teacher for a long time.
Yeah.
It's kind of ingrained. You
Yeah.
feel it coming.
Okay. It's time. The University of Glasgow has been hugely supportive of this event, so we are delighted that the Principal, Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli, has agreed to open the conference.
Well, thank you very much, Willie, for that introduction, and good afternoon. I really am delighted to welcome you all to our magnificent Bute Hall and to formally open the very first international conference celebrating all things Outlander. Can I first begin today by just thanking all of my university colleagues for their efforts in organizing this conference. I know that we were very disappointed to have to postpone this due to the pandemic. It was originally organized for during that time, but it's really fantastic for all of this to come together and for all of you to be able to be together this week. So many of my colleagues have been involved in the planning of the conference, so I can't mention them all, unfortunately, but just to give a special thanks to all involved in the College of Arts and Humanities, led by Professor Joe Gill, and especially, of course, to Professor Willie Maley and his colleagues in the School of Critical Studies. And of course, all of our events, security and facilities colleagues who will do a great job this week supporting the conference. And I'm really very excited that we'll be hosting world-famous author of Outlander and University of Glasgow honorary graduate, Diana Gabaldon, who's on stage with us this afternoon to kick off the conference with her lecture on why it had to be Scotland as the scene for her best-selling series. Diana, thank you again for joining us. It's a real pleasure to welcome you back to the university. I know you think of Glasgow as a home from home, and I know your books, of course, have changed the way in which we see Scotland and its place in the world. So it's really fitting that we host you here at our world-changing university. And thank goodness that Diana chose Scotland as her setting. Outlander has proved to be of tremendous value to Scottish heritage and tourism. It's played a vital role in nurturing film production here. It's shone a light on a period of history, the Jacobite Risings, which many people outside of Scotland knew very little about until Claire, a World War II nurse, travelled back in time through some standing stones in 1743. And Claire, of course, meets Jamie Fraser, played by Sam Heughan in the series. And Sam is another of our honorary graduates here in Glasgow. And the story brings 18th century Scotland and its emigrants to the American colonies to vivid life. And indeed, just recently here at the university, in this very hall, we've been commemorating the tercentenary of the father of modern economics, Adam Smith. And we've been evaluating how that period of political change and the Scottish Enlightenment in the 18th century shaped the world today. It's allowed us to reflect on our nuanced history in Glasgow and the role that we can play now as a world-changing institution to address inequality and injustice, and equally to bring to life some of the lesser-known works, thinkers and creatives of that era. The Outlander book and TV series have similarly shone a light on a number of issues of historical importance, and the series has stimulated considerable interest in the Gaelic language, bringing together a wave of new learners. And of course, colleagues here at Glasgow and fans of the show will recognise Gilabreach Macmillan, and fans of the show here will know that he's also senior lecturer in Gaelic at the university, but he stars as Gwilym the Bard in season 1 of the TV series. And Gilabreach, who's been a Gaelic advisor on the series, also gives his name to a character in Diana's most recent novel. So we're really proud here at Glasgow about the work that we do in Gaelic teaching and research. And in fact, Outlander addresses several other key concerns that align with the university's research priorities in the arts and humanities, including an exploration of medicine, of healing and surgery in history and literature, which our Medical Humanities Research Centre is focused on, and the role of fantasy in shaping our view of the past, which we examine through our Centre for Fantasy and the Fantastic here in Glasgow. And on global Scottish history and literature, we're really proud to jointly host the Scottish Council on Global Affairs, an international think tank in partnership with the Universities of Edinburgh and Glasgow, Edinburgh and St Andrews. We're also proud to be the global leaders in the Robert Burns research here in Glasgow through the Global Burns Network and the Centre for Robert Burns Studies. So from Gilles Brige de Bard to Scotland's National Bard, we cover all bases here in Glasgow. And of course, we're equally proud to be partnered with the city's Kelvin Hall, which is currently being developed into a production facility and film studio, delivering a huge boost to the city's dynamic screen and creative sectors. The cultural and creative economy is a major research theme for us at the university, so again, the impact of Outlander on Scotland's film and TV sector, tourism, dress and textile history cannot be overstated. Now, our university was also the first university in the UK to come forward with a programme of reparative justice and to make a commitment to address our institution's historic links to the slave trade. Outlander has also explored slavery, and I know that this week we'll have the opportunities to hear from colleagues involved in our Beniba Centre for Slavery Studies and from those in our university who have been leading our decolonising of the curriculum, and our own Hunterian Museum, which hosts the Curating Discomfort initiative, encouraging us to think critically about colonial systems like the British Empire. So this week, I really hope you'll have the chance to participate in many of the thought-provoking sessions we have organised. Diana will be joined by expert scholars tackling themes such as Jacobite history, screen production, Scottish tourism, Gaelic and Scots, costume design, fandom, and Claire Fraser's medicine and witchcraft. We hope that you'll all enjoy time here at the university. Please don't forget to pay a visit to our famous cloisters, which doubled as 1960s Harvard in the TV series, although Harvard is a much younger university than the University of Glasgow. But we are pleased that our campus and colleagues have been indirectly involved in that production. So once again, Diana, thanks for joining us here. Thank you all for joining us this week, and I hope you really have a very enjoyable conference. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, on behalf of the organising committee for the Outlander Conference Glasgow, we'd like to give you a very warm welcome to this opening session. One of this city's slogans is, "People make Glasgow." People make conferences too, and we're glad to welcome so many of you here today to make this conference in Glasgow. While some of you haven't had too far to travel, we're delighted to have so many international scholars join us from across many disciplines. This not only demonstrates Outlander's reach, but also the ways it lends itself to rich interdisciplinary research due to the multiple themes it engages with. I'm a fan, not just an academic man. This conference, of course, would not be possible without our star guest, Outlander author Diana Gabaldon, and not just in the obvious sense that without Diana there's no Jamie, there's no Claire, there's no Lallybroch, there's no Fraser Ridge. Diana from the word go has been a generous, engaging and enthusiastic supporter of this conference, almost an honorary member of the organising committee. She even revised a press release that needed a deft writer's touch. Readers of the Outlander novels know Diana's gift for detail, her scrupulous attention to the minutiae of everyday life in the period or periods in which the novels are set. That ear for the exact phrase is not confined to the novels, as those who follow her on Twitter know. There's an immense overspill from the novels into all her communications. The magnificent venue we're in this afternoon, Bute Hall, was built in the 1870s after the University of Glasgow moved across the city from the east to the West End, from the medieval heart of the city to a new affluent suburb. The university was founded in 1451, long before Claire Beecham went through the stones. In that sense, the university is older than Outlander, but has also provided, together with the surrounding neighbourhood here, key settings for the TV series. Many of you will have today walked through our famous cloisters, as the principal says, which stood in for Harvard, or as I like to call it, upstart Harvard. Founded in 1636, 185 years after Glasgow. Our Students' Representative Council are on hand to deliver some fantastic walking tours later in the week for those who have signed up on what will be a fascinating journey through the university's history. And some of those stones from the East End made their way to the West End, so we did go through the stones and through time when we came here. This conference celebrates the novels of Diana Gabaldon, which have enthralled millions of readers, myself included, for over 3 decades. Although Outlander, the production, has made Scotland its base, Outlander, the series, moves from Scotland to France to colonial America and the War of Independence there, and explores issues that remain relevant today: slavery, war, violence, medical advances, the representation of Indigenous peoples. Many of these resonate with my own research interests as Professor of Renaissance Studies, in the representation of national and colonial identities, and with those of my colleague Lisa Kelly of Film and TV Studies, who I will hand over to now.
Thanks, Willie. Now, as you are all no doubt aware, since 2014, Outlander, the TV series from Sony and Starz, has engaged new audiences across multiple territories. Global interest in both the novels and the TV series has benefited Scottish tourism through what has become known as the Outlander effect. The TV series has also had a beneficial impact on the Scottish screen sector. So not only does it showcase our fabulous landscape, but it has led to the development, as you've heard, of a dedicated studio space and numerous employment opportunities, including a training programme specifically for new entrants. This provides an excellent pathway for film and TV students, such as those here at Glasgow. And of course, we stand in solidarity with the writers and actors currently taking strike action as they seek to create better working conditions for generations to come. Now, you have already heard how the themes of Outlander resonate with many of our research interests here in Glasgow, including our newly founded Beniba Centre for Slavery Studies. Eminent scholar Sir Geoff Palmer will be speaking on the subject of slavery in his plenary on Friday. Tomorrow morning, we will hear from Professor Murray Pittock, whose groundbreaking book on Culloden has changed the way we think about that episode and its aftermath. And on Thursday, we will hear from Dr. Catherine Byrne, who will be talking about sexual violence in Outlander, a key issue that is addressed throughout the series. As well as these 4 plenaries, we have a magnificent, rich and varied set of papers on many aspects of Outlander. And we also have some great social events lined up too, including our night at the museum and a ceilidh, so I hope you've all bought your dancing shoes. This conference has been a long time in the making. It started as an idea in 2019 and was put on hold because of the pandemic. It's finally taking place this week. Diana has been involved from the very beginning, and we are very grateful for the fact that a number of our original presenters have stuck with us through this difficult spell. Willie, Gilbridge and I, on behalf of the entire conference committee, are delighted that the time has come for the first chapter of the Glasgow Outlander Conference to begin. And I'll now hand over to Gilbridge, who will introduce Diana.
Thank you very much to Willie and Lisa, and also Principal Muscatelli. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome a person, I think it's fair to say, who has done more for the Scottish tourism industry in the last 10 years than any other person or agency. I'm sure you'll know that many of the historic locations, such as Culloden Battlefield, or filming locations, such as Kouros and Blackness Castle, are welcoming thousands upon thousands of tourists looking to find their own Jamie. I, of course, keep wondering when they're coming to find their own Gwilym the Bard. But I'm sure the day will come. But the person we must thank for that is the writer of the Outlander series, Dr. Diana Gabaldon. Diana Gabaldon is, of course, a double doctor, having an honorary degree just last summer from the University of Glasgow, and also a PhD in quantitative behavioural ecology, as well as a bachelor's degree in zoology and a master's in marine biology. And she was, of course, a professor at Arizona State University's Center for Environmental Studies. But all that came to an end when Diana decided to write a book just to see if she could. And after that rather successful attempt, the rest, as they say, is history. The Outlander series has sold multi-millions of copies worldwide, and since 2014, it has been on screens throughout the world, giving Scotland and its languages, culture, history, and actors an extraordinary platform on the international stage. Willie and Lisa have mentioned the cities and the university's links with Outlander. Indeed, the university's motto, Via Veritas Vita, the way, the truth, and the life, could almost be a resume of the Outlander stories, with, of course, a few twists and subplots here and there. And the university's current strategy motto is World Changers Welcome. Though for the next 4 days, I think we can all agree that that motto will change to Time Travelers and World Changers Welcome. But could it have all been so different? Could we be having this conference on the Mayan Peninsula had things been different? Let's find out why we are here rather than there. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Diana Gabaldon to give this plenary lecture at the first ever Outlander conference with her lecture entitled Why Scotland, Why Not Mexico? Genes, Borders, Culture and Fiction, Why They Matter and When They Don't. Please welcome Dr. Diana Gabaldon.
That's a little bit. Good job. Well, hi. I always take a deep breath, hoping my microphone is on, but apparently it is. So, hi, and thank you so much for coming today. Before I start in, I'd like to thank also Galabrici there, and also Willie Maley, who is, the two of them have been the main drivers of this conference, putting things together with Lisa, and obviously a number of other helpful people. But most of all, thanks to you for coming, because without you, there would not be a conference. Okay, when I start with the organizers, I don't usually say, how long do you want me to talk? It's more, when do you want me to stop? You know, because I was a university professor for a long time and used to talking to auditoria full of 400 or 500 students at a time. So I'm kind of used to it. Back in the day, though, I was teaching human anatomy and physiology for the most part. And that's why I got big crowds, because everyone in the sports department took it. They were forced to have one science class, and they thought human anatomy and physiology would be the easiest. So they all signed up. And so I would walk in the morning and see the entire football team lined up in the front row. They came in after practice, and they were all sound asleep, you know, these large inanimate blobs of flesh. And I would walk up to the edge of the platform and say, well, this morning, gentlemen, we're going to discuss the history of contraception. They all start blinking. And I'd say, in days of old, when knights were bold and condoms not invented, they wrapped old socks around their cocks and babies were prevented. Well, it worked on the football players, too. Yeah. Anyway, I came to Scotland. I had never been here when I started writing Outlander. I came for the first time as an author, I think in the middle of my third book or thereabouts. So I was with my husband, and we were walking down Princess Street, and I said, oh, there's a bookstore, and I cannot pass up bookstores. But the thing is, I was told early on by a bookseller that I should sign every book of mine that I saw in a bookstore, because then the owner of the bookstore could not send them back to the publisher. So I did that for many years. And so I went in just to look around. Well, the thing about Scottish bookstores is that they have something that no other kind of bookstore has, and that is a section for Scottish fiction. I was thinking, well, this is cool. Yeah, so anyway, I had been looking for my own books in the usual sections, and no, there it was in Scottish fiction, so I was extremely flattered. And when I found the manager to ask if I could sign the books, I mentioned this to him. I said, I'm really honored that you put my books in the Scottish fiction section. He looked at me and he said, well, you know, Gabaldon is such an odd name, we thought it might quite well be Scottish. As a matter of fact, it's not. It is a Spanish name. And were we speaking Spanish, it would be pronounced Gabaldon. since we're not, is pronounced pretty much every other way you can think of in the world. But the most common, if we're English speakers, is Gabaldon. It still has a long O in the last. The British pronunciation is usually Gabaldon, spoken with very tight lips. But it gets across. We know who I am. So that leads to a question, which I get quite frequently, which is, are you Scottish? Obviously not. And, well, but if you're not Scottish, why did you want to write a book about Scotland? Well, therein lies the tale. Essentially, I did not want to write a book about Scotland. I did not want to write a book about Scotland either, but that was not foremost in my mind. What I wanted was to learn how to write a novel, because in spite of being a scientist with assorted degrees, being a university lecturer, by the way, is just stand-up comedy with health benefits. So it's not that hard. But I'd been wanting to write a novel since I was about 8 years old. That's when I finally realized that people actually wrote the books in the library. They didn't just spring out of the shelves like toilet paper in the grocery store. And so I said, well, I think I want to do that. I want to write books that are interesting, that kind of lift people up and all that. Anyway, that ambition remained with me, but I came from a very conservative family background, and my father used to say to me, "You're such a poor judge of character, you're bound to marry some bum," he said. "So be sure you get a good education so you can support your family." So with this going on at home, I thought perhaps I would not mention that I wanted to write books, since this is not a very profitable occupation by and large. And so I went into science. I liked science. I was good at it. But I still wanted to write a novel. And when I turned 35, I started thinking, and I thought, well, Mozart was dead at 36. Maybe if you want to write a book, you should get a move on here. And so I said, all right, on my next birthday, I will start writing a book. And the next question was, well, what shall I write? Because, writing a book is a rather broad proposition. And I thought, well, maybe I should write a mystery. I read more mysteries than anything else right now. And I thought, no, mysteries have plots. I'm not sure I can do that yet. So I said, what's the easiest possible kind of book I could write for practice? And I thought, well, for me, maybe historical fiction would be the easiest thing. I was a university research professor. I had access to the library, the interlibrary loan system, and I knew how to look things up. This was important because this was before the internet was invented, if you can imagine such a thing. And so I said, okay, if I turn out to have no imagination, I can steal things from the historical record. That sounds like a good idea. Okay, fine, historical fiction it is. Next question is, where and when do I set this? History is a big place, and the places in which it can occur are endless. So I was thinking, well, what do I want? What exactly? And I was thinking, well, it could be anything. Mind you, this is a practice book. I'm not going to show it to anyone. I'm not going to tell anyone that I'm doing it, because they'd try to stop me. But no, my husband would have tried to stop me. Not out of any fear of my writing a book, but out of fear that I would drop dead, since at this point I had 3 small children under the age of 6 and 2 full-time jobs. And he would have said, well, wait till the kids are in school, wait till, my business is doing better and you can quit one of your jobs and so forth. And I thought that he might actually succeed in stopping me, so I just didn't tell him what I was doing. I just started writing in the middle of the night along with everything else. So I said, okay, write a novel. The only way to learn how to do something is actually to do it, and then you practice at it and you do it more and you get better at it. That's the theory, at least. Works for ice skating, basketball, why not novels? So, okay, we're back to historical fiction. Where am I going to set this novel? Well, I was thinking, American Civil War, that doomed romantic causes, that's all real good. World War II, maybe not. I mean, that's exciting, but maybe it's not quite historical enough. This was 1988 when I began writing. And, other things, French Revolution, no, that's too senseless. And different things. And in this malleable frame of mind, I happened to be watching a really old episode of Doctor Who on public television. Now, those of you who are British are all nodding because you know who Doctor Who is. Just in case anyone here doesn't, it is a really old, really long-running British TV show in which the Doctor, who is a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey, travels through space and time having adventures. And along the way, he picks up various companions from different periods of Earth's history. And in this particular show that I was watching, he had picked up a young Scotsman from 1745. This was a nice-looking young man who appeared in his kilt. And I said, well, that's fetching. I suppose here for two things. One is an appreciation of Fraser Hines, who is the young actor who appeared in his kilt and started all of this, so to speak. The other is an appreciation of the kilt. When my sixth book, when it came out, won some sort of international fiction award, and it was given to me in Germany. So I went, and the German publisher was very excited and had me interviewed by all of the German press, everyone from the tabloid newspapers on up. And finally, I was talking to a man from a literary journal, and he was saying, "Oh, I've read all your books; they're so wonderful. Your characterization is exquisite. Your narrative is just transcendental." And I'm thinking, yes, go on. And instead, he looked at me and he said, "There's just this one thing I am curious about. Could you explain to me what is the appeal of a man in a kilt?" And well, if I hadn't been very tired, I might not have said it, but I just looked at him and I said, "Well, I suppose it's the idea that you could be up against a wall with him in a minute." For you gentlemen in the audience, that is actually it. But anyway, a few weeks later, I was home again, and I got this pile of press clippings from this little jaunt, and the German publisher had written a note in English on the top one. She said, "I don't know what you told this man, but I think he is in love with you." So anyway, very enticing and an interesting image and so forth. Okay, so then I sat down and began to write a book for practice, and again, I was not telling anyone. Okay, the scope of this particular lecture, though, is not the entire history of how I wrote Outlander, because most of you probably know that already, or have read it in the Outlandish Companion, though you're more than welcome to ask questions afterward if you want to know more about any of that. What I was going to talk about here is what people think about the books, and why they think that, and why I did what I did, and things like that. So we start with Waterstones, and we thought it might quite well be Scottish, and you can't really tell whether someone is Scottish by looking at them. You can tell about some other things, which I will get to. Part of that is my own family history. Let's see, as you can tell from looking at me, I don't exactly look like a standard British person, but I could be, more or less. Well, my mother's side of the family is along those lines. My great-great-grandfather was a royal artist to the court of Queen Victoria. He designed the facade of the Victoria and Albert Museum. I think it's called something else now, Museum of Industry and Beauty or something. And if you go in there, you will see the facade, which is now in the backyard rather than on the front of the building. But also, he designed the Grand Salon, which was supposed to be for fancy eating while attending this. Right now, it is, in fact, a fast food place, but all of the original tiling and stuff, which is very beautiful, is still there. Anyway, his sons, two of them, emigrated to the US after he died, and he died young, unfortunately. So at the ages of 17 and 19, they emigrated to America and made their way across the entire country to Arizona, where they settled. My great-grandfather was he was the maker of the telescopic dome through which the planet Pluto was discovered. Okay. So we have both art and science on that side of the family, so forth. My father, his son, was a newspaper editor, writer, and things like that. Okay, on the other side of my family, my dad was born in Belen, New Mexico, and his parents were dirt poor, and I mean that literally rather than metaphorically. Excuse me. Goodness, I knew I was going to dry out. That's why I brought a glass of water. Thank you. Yeah. Anyway, that's all they had was dirt. And my dad was the youngest of 13 children, which means that I have several thousand people named Gabaldon who are all related to me. If your name is anything like that, you're undoubtedly one of my cousins. But the thing is, my parents met in the high school drum and bugle corps when they were both 15 or so, and fell madly in love, wanted to be married. Well, my dad was, at that point, what was called a Mexican, in spite of the fact that he was not a Mexican. He was Hispanic, and looked it, and so forth. This was 1949 in a small mountain town in Arizona. This was like not the cutting edge of culture. And so, my dad was subjected to a certain amount of discrimination and looked down upon and things like that. And my mother's parents weren't at all pleased that she wanted to marry this man. Neither was anybody else in town. Public petitions were taken out against their marriage, and all kinds of just nasty stuff. My mother's high school English teacher took her aside and said, "You can't marry that man. Your children will be idiots." Well, we see how that worked out. But anyway, this is my family history. So you know, which side is more important to me? Do you see a difference? Do you see a dividing line? Oh, right. Here we come up against this, this question. If you want to write something, does it have to be something that, you know, culturally belongs to you? Are you only allowed to write stuff from your own life? Okay, so if I write something from my mother's side of the family, which is full of adventure and science and a lot of other things, is that totally cool, or is that out of bounds because I actually should be over here on the brown side? And if I were writing from that side, well, am I not allowed anymore to write about, you know, space, time, and things like that? Where do you get off? So this is kind of what's the matter with identity politics. And mind you, I never speak about politics or religion in public, but this is a very specific incident because it affects, you know, book writing and book publishing and things like that. We see a lot of this nonsense where people are saying, oh, you can't have, you know, a person of color in your book. And I send them my picture and say, I am a person of color, how about that? In which case they sort of go, and pretend they didn't hear me the first time. But there is a lot of this. You know, I have read recently a wonderful book. It's a mystery thriller with a lot of voodoo and murder and interesting stuff. Very atmospheric. It's beautifully written, very appealing. It's never going to get published because the protagonist is black and the author is white. Yeah, so, you know, if I live long enough, I'm going to start a publishing company for, you know, improperly written books like this. But that's another thing for another time. So anyway, borders and boundaries and so forth. To me, a border is a physical thing, you know, something like a river or an agreed upon stretch of land, something that divides one, you know, more or less cohesive community or culture from another more or less cohesive community or culture. If you live in an area of the world, such as the Balkans, where your cultures overlap within your boundaries, you get wars, you get a lot of unsettlement. So borders have their uses. And they have a very specific physical use, let us say. There's less, you know, culture attached to them. You know, the Mexican side of the border is not more important or in any way different than the US side of the border. It's all the Rio Grande, you know, so there's right there. Boundaries, though, are not physical. Most boundaries, especially in the arts, are purely imaginary, but they are subscribed to by X number of people. One that is not subscribed to by very many people, well, that's just going to dissolve into smoke and nothingness. But a boundary that is subscribed to by a large number of people, especially people who can do something about it, i.e. publishers and editors and things like that, that's actively dangerous because that boundary does not exist. It's just not there. But, you know, because somebody got a wild hair and decided that, well, you can't do that, you know, and every other person that they talked to was afraid of offending them. You know, God help us that you should offend anybody. You know, naturally, I've never done something like that. But then they all cave. You know, well, it's a very cowardly industry because it's so precarious. People are afraid of losing their jobs. You know, and if it comes up to it, they're saying, well, okay, if the party line is, well, you can't do that, well, then you can't do that because I want to keep my job. This is totally understandable, but it's not admirable. And we don't approve. Oh, anyway, why I decided to write a book set in Scotland is because of a man in a kilt. But having decided that, I, of course, went immediately to the library and started looking up everything I could find on Scotland. Well, I looked up the call numbers on the newly electronified card catalog, and it gave me 2 pages of call numbers, and so I went and looked, and here were 400 books on Scotland, you know, clothing, culture, language, geography, history, everything. So I tiptoed along and took out anything that looked interesting. I mean, this is my rule of thumb for doing research, is that if it's not interesting, I don't want it in my book, so we'll just skip that, thank you. This means that I miss a few things, but, you know, yeah, it saves me a lot of time. Anyway, so I took all those back to my office with me and would read while waiting for phone calls or, you know, typing with one hand, things like that. I mean, if you have 3 children and 2 jobs, you multitask, and you sleep on your floor when nobody's calling. Anyway, but we were thinking furthermore of the boundary aspects of this once I did write it. The short form here is that I did write it, and the internet started more or less at the same time. We had these 3 what were called information services, CompuServe, Genie, and Delphi. Most of you are not old enough to have heard of any of them. Oh, there's a couple there. Yes, but they were all very early forerunners of the internet, and they each had special interest groups, as they called them, or forums, as they called them. And these were for people who had a special interest in old cars, gardening, ancient Mesopotamian literature, science fiction, whatever. Well, one of my jobs was writing reviews for the computer press. I, owing to a lot of other accidents that I won't go into, had developed an expertise in scientific computation, which was not a big thing back then, but because it wasn't, nobody else did it. And so I was able to write to Byte magazine and enclose with it a comic book that I had written for Walt Disney, and also a copy of Science Software Quarterly, which was a journal that I had founded and published through my university, and it was for scientists who used computers in their work. So I wrote this very small letter and said, "Dear sirs," I mean, they're all men. They all were then, and they all still are. "Dear sirs, as you can see from the enclosed, you won't find anyone who knows more about scientific and technical software than I do, and at the same time can write so as to appeal to a broad popular audience." Well, this got immediate results, and within a year I was making as much freelancing from the computer press as I was at the university, which just goes to show you how badly they pay university professors in the US. I hope they pay them better here, but I'm not asking. Anyway, what happened next? Well, I keep notes for a reason, but I never look at them, so it doesn't help. Oh, okay. Yeah, how I got published and so forth. Well, what happened next was that Byte magazine sent me something to review, and with it they sent along a disc, floppy disks they were called back then, 5 1/4, of a connection to CompuServe. And they said, well, this software manufacturer has a new support forum on CompuServe, you know, where you can log on and ask them questions, and they will answer you as soon as they get around to it. And well, this was just the utterly most sexy thing anyone ever had heard of in this particular field. And so Byte said, well, they would really like you to mention this forum that they have. Would you log into CompuServe and check it out? So I did, checked it out, wrote the review. And then I still had 4 hours of free connect time. This was back when they charged you $30 an hour to be connected to the internet, if you can imagine that. And so I said, well, I'm not Scottish, but I'm not wasting 4 hours worth of free connect time. That's what, $120? Yeah, so I sat down and decided to see what else was in there. Well, I poked through a number of different things, and I stumbled into the literary forum. And this was a group of people who liked books. There were some writers there in every stage of development, and there were a lot of people who didn't write but liked to talk to writers, and everybody liked to talk about books. So for someone with 2 full-time jobs and 3 small children, it was the ideal social life. And so I began working at that, and I always worked at night because, you know, the kids were in bed. So was my husband, so he didn't know what I was doing. And, you know, and well, when I began writing Outlander, I was doing it in the garage on this IBM XT, which he was using for his business. At the time, he had quit his job to start his own business, which became quite successful, but it started in our garage. And so when he moved out and got, you know, proper office facilities, he left behind the XT for me to use. And so I was using that for my work. Well, one night, in he comes and says, well, I wrote a contract, and it's on your computer. Can I use it for a minute to print it out? And I said, yeah, sure, pushing back. Well, if you've ever seen an IBM XT, it has a very small memory. It would list everything in the computer when you touched the directory key. So he forgot what he'd named his contract, touched the directory key, and up came 80 files named Jamie. Well, they're all named Jamie. You know, it's a Jamie plus the number of the book. So if I'm writing something today, it would be Jamie 10, and then a symbol indicating what year it is. So today it would be Jamie 10 number sign. Octothorpe is what it is, a dot, and then a 3-digit code for the name, the day of the month on which I started that. And today is what, July the 18th, yeah, so it would be Jamie 10, Octothorpe dot 717. And so it's got a unique name. I can find it at any time. That's all you need for a computer name to be, is unique. And so we had all these files named Jamie. So my husband looks at me and says, who's Jamie? And I said, is this book I'm writing all right? He could tell from my tone of voice that I was not to be trifled with. But, oh, a man and a kilt, goodness gracious. And don't anybody look. And so he became interested cautiously in what I was doing, and after a while was standing behind me while I wrote, reading off the screen in what he fondly considers to be a Scottish accent. And anyway, he got quite used to it, and in fact he has become my sole reader before I send things to an editor. But when I've finished a scene, I'll leave it on his sink in the morning, and because I work at night and he works in the morning, and he'll read it during the day and bring it back to me at lunch with marginal notes like nipple again. He's a very astute beta reader, you might say. Anyway, so we get along very well with that. Where else was I going? Oh, yes. Okay, well, so the book gets published eventually. That's a short form. I was introduced to the man who became my agent by someone on the Lit Forum. And then I finished the book. I sold it, he sold it in 3 days. He got bids from 3 different publishers, and so he went around amongst them and managed to sell me a 3-book contract, being I was a novelist, which this doesn't happen all that often, and I was sort of going around saying, this can't be real, but it was. But the next question was, what kind of thing is this book? Granted, it's historical fiction, except that the main character is a time traveler, which kind of puts it out of that. It is technically fantasy because of the time travel. On the other hand, it's not got anything to do with elves and dragons, and it could be science fiction because it is explained how the time travel works, or over the course of several books it is, but it can't be science fiction because there are no spaceships, Marketing departments in publishing houses are very literal-minded. Anyway, none of this, of course, bothered me at all while I was writing the book because who cared? No one was ever going to see it. But now things became different. And it took the publisher 18 months to figure out what to do with it. In the meantime, I learned later they came very close to canceling the contract and giving me back the book because they couldn't decide how to sell it. And Amazon.com has fortunately solved that problem for me and others, because now a book can be classified as several things at once. And people can pick off the one that they want and they'll still get the same book. Whereas back in the day, it was only bookstores. You had to put a book on a certain shelf, and that shelf had a label. So the book had to have that label. Okay, so my agent calls me up and he says, well, they have finally decided to publish your book. They want to sell it in as a romance. And I said, what? Because, I have no objection whatever to romance novels. I used to belong to the romance novels novelists of America. They were very mad. But they put up with me for a while. And anyway, I was saying, well, it's not that I have anything against romances, but I mean, you've read the book. And he said, I have. And I said, the thing is, if you call it romance, you'll cut off the entire male half of my readership. I said, these books have things that men see that women don't, and vice versa. So, I would like the entire book to be appreciated and understood as it is. And he, being a man, said, yes, I understand. He said, the thing is, a bestseller in science fiction and fantasy is 50,000 copies in paperback. A bestseller in romance is 500,000 copies. I said, you got a point, sell it as romance. Because what I was thinking was, my first editor said to me early on, these have to be word-of-mouth books because they're too weird to describe to anyone, which is totally true. And with that in mind, I said, well, if that is the case, then it makes much better sense to expose the book to 500,000, or however many thousand people that you can get in a romance thing, because they will all, if they like it, go out and tell their friends, some of whom will be men, some of whom will be non-romance readers, and so forth, and the word will spread. And we did that, and that is exactly what happened. It took us a number of years, though. In the meantime, my book was stuck in the romance section, especially of Barnes & Noble, which was very disedifying to me whenever I saw it there. And I spent years. Whenever I did a book signing for them, I would talk to the store manager, explain, and they said, oh, yes, we've read it. And no, it's certainly not a romance, but we can't move it. And because the district manager gives us this list, and it has to be here. So next time I ran into a district manager, I talked to them, and they were saying, well, we understand. We love the book. And no, it's certainly not a romance, but we can't move it because it's a top-down organization. The laws for every single book in a store come down from New York, and we cannot alternate. So they tell you how many copies of each book you can have and where you have to put them in the store. And I was thinking, well, this is a stone wall if I ever ran into one, but I'm not done yet. So anyway, I began fuming and thinking and so forth. I was on a book tour, and I went into a store to sign books. It was for Lord John and the Private Matter. Where is it? It's in the romance section. Anyway, I signed the books for them, but I was so dissatisfied by this that I called my editor and said, I'm not finishing the book tour if they're going to keep putting my books in the romance section. So, there were only 2 days left. And she said, I'll call and tell them. So I said, fine. I was in Half Moon Bay, so I walked down to the beach, which is very beautiful, in spite of there being a dead sea lion on it. Walked back and forth, sort of fuming and plotting and so forth. And finally I said, I got nothing to lose here. I'm going to talk to whoever is at the top of Barnes & Noble, which turned out to be a man named Steve Riggio. So it was not hard to find an address for him. And so I sat down and wrote him a medium rude letter saying, Dear Mr. Riggio, I understand that you sell my books in your bookstore, and I'm assuming that you know this because of the sales figures, which turn up toward the top of the list every month. I'm assuming that you also know where the books are placed, since you placed them there. And, I'm assuming that you don't know that Hastings, a competing bookstore chain, sells 4 times more of my books than you do. I assume you would like to know why this is. It's because they're not putting them in the effing romance section, Steve. So, God bless Hastings, so forth. Anyway, so I heard nothing for a while, and I was thinking, well, that's the end of that. But 6 weeks later, I got a call from someone who was their VP of marketing and so forth, and we had a more or less cordial, if charged, conversation for about 10 minutes, and he said, I'll look into it, and hung up, and I figured I'm never going to hear any more about that. Next thing I know, I get a call from Steve Riggio, who says, well, we looked into it, you're right, we're moving them. I said, thank you very much. So that one all ended happily. Is that indicating that I should stop talking? No, we have a little bit more. So anyway, back to our original title, which is Why Scotland, Why Not Mexico? Because what a lot of people say to me when we're talking, about the books and so forth, is, have you ever thought of writing a book set in Mexico? I'm going, no, why would I do that? And they say, well, aren't you Mexican? And I'd say, well, A, no, but B, what difference would it make if I were? I mean, one of this thing that goes along with identity politics is an assumption that you can only write about yourself and your own life. Anything else is verboten. And a lot of people assume that you must write about yourself and your own life because the adage is write what you know, and well, I don't know anything except my own experience. And both of those are wrong. It should really be don't write what you don't know, because I have read books that do that. I once judged a writing contest for people who were writing the first chapter of a romance novel. This was for the RWA, and had won a critique from me. Anyway, they had a nice story going on with a dashing 18th century naval captain who finds what he thinks is a mermaid, but is really a female time traveler in a wetsuit. Can't think where they got that idea. And he hauls her ashore onto his boat in a net, and discovering that it's really a young lady whose skin comes off, is entranced, and tells someone, take the lady to my private bathing room. At this point, I stopped reading. It said, 18th century ship much, huh? Private bathing room? Had you ever read one word about an 18th century ship, you would realize they don't have private bathrooms, so forth. So anyway, you don't write what you don't know. The thing is, you can find out anything that you need to know, within reason, but pretty much anything you can need to know. I've talked to a lot of gay men when I wrote the Lord John books and so forth. And I had one good friend who actually did perpetual adoration at the Catholic Church with me at midnight. And he was openly gay and so forth. And he knew what I was writing, was sort of a fan. The next week, I came in at midnight, and he met me in the parking lot and opened his trunk, and he said, here, I thought you should have these for your research, but I couldn't take them inside with Jesus. And he hands me this package of very explicit gay magazines for my research, which I put in my own trunk, and then we went in to talk to Jesus. So, but you can find out what you need to know, and if you ever need to know anything about how gay sex is accomplished, I am in a position to tell you that. With luck, I won't have to, but I know a lot of things I don't put in my books. Anyway, back to why Scotland and why not Mexico and so forth. Well, on the Mexican side of my heritage, I told you about the maternal side. Mexican side, the farthest back person I could trace came from Spain to Mexico City in 1679. And remained there. As far as I know, he had children, though, and two of his sons went north and settled in Santa Fe in 1705, where they show up in the city rolls. Santa Fe is not as old as Glasgow, but it is 425 years old at the time when it goes back a ways. All right, so from the moment of this man's landing, he was a Spaniard. He remained a Spaniard because Mexico was still New Spain. Okay, New Mexico territory was New Spain, so everybody was Spaniards up to that point. Okay, then came the War of Mexican Independence, which was 1821, I think. Okay, Mexico won that war, they were independent, so suddenly everybody there became a Mexican rather than a Spaniard, and the indigenous Aztecs and so forth. And, then let's see, that was still part of Mexico. The New Mexico territory still belonged to Mexico. So yes, everybody was a Mexican at that point. But in 1846, along comes the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which cedes New Mexico to the United States, at which point Los Gabaldones became Americans without ever moving a step. Which just goes to show you the value of labels in judging anybody in their culture, etc. But people assume, that you must be desperately interested in whatever your own genetic or ethnic connections are, and that you should not be interested in anything else. Okay, that's just not true. Okay, it may get you in trouble, but go ahead, write about whoever, whatever you want to. Yeah, getting in trouble is not the worst thing that ever happened to an author. It's good press. And look at J.K. Rowling. But anyway, so much for that. Okay. All right. Okay, the point of this story is that a person's sense of self isn't usually one-dimensional, that we see an awful lot of political bilge based on exactly that assumption. You're not. People can write about any aspect, both of their own lives, of their interests, of other people. If you write about someone else, someone generically else, that is not about a specific other person. In that case, there is a law of, slander and libel, things like that. So you want to be careful if you do write about other people by name, but, change the name, no one's going to find out. You can write anything you want, and don't let anybody stop you. But aside from don't write what you don't know, there are various other, rules for writing. Yes. Don't worry about any of those either. The only important thing is to write. And so here are Gabaldon's 3 rules for writing. Number 1 is read. Read everything you can get your hands on. Read good stuff, read bad stuff, because this is how you're going to learn to tell the difference. If you read something bad, you know it's bad, and you can say, why is this so bad? Why don't I like this? You can say, well, because I can't read it. There's no paragraphs. It just goes on by the page. This would describe any novel by Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, by the way, both of whom got away with it. Or I don't like this because it has this particular kind of person in it, and I don't like them. That's legit. You're a reader. You get to pick, and so forth. But why did you like one book over another? If you read 2 mysteries, say, well, I like this one more than this one. Why is that? Well, I think it's because I like the characters more in this one than this one. Why do you like the characters more? And you think, well, it's because of the way they talk. These guys, they talk like real people. They've got short sentences, and these guys, their sentences go all the way down the page, and I don't remember what they said by the time they get to the end. And they're always saying things like, as you know, Bob, your father, the king, in case you had forgotten him since breakfast. I've read books like that. Everybody has. But anyway, don't do that. But here is the first valuable lesson about being a writer. You have learned what dialogue looks like. And good dialogue has short sentences. It should sound the way people sound. Things like accent and so forth are a different elevation of that. This is the simple form here. So basically, read everything. And you will learn what you are interested in. Don't ever try to write something because you think it will sell. This is absolutely the kiss of death, and it's also a really bad reason. It certainly won't sell because things written like that they're not authentic. They don't have your voice. And so you write something that you want to write, even if it's your grandchildren who are going to read it, that's worthwhile. But the thing is, that leads you to the second rule, which is write. Actually, putting words on paper is the only thing that will teach you to write. You can go to all the classes that you like, you can go to seminars, and you can take college degrees in writing. I know many people who have. They can't write because they don't write anything other than term papers and so forth. Yeah, you have to actually put words on paper. But, bear in mind, in the days of computers, this is much easier than it used to be when you had to type the thing. People thought more about what they were writing than they had to type it. This is why Hemingway's books are like this and mine are like this. But the other thing is that you don't need to feel like you have made an irrevocable choice when you write a sentence. Stand there and look at it, take words out, put them back. It's words on the page. They can be changed. Now, this is my personal philosophy of writing because I'm a very slow writer. I sit there and look at it, and I move a word, and I think, no, that's not right. I move it back, and I move this word instead. No, that's not right either. How about I take both of them out? Well, that's better, but then I need another word here. Anyway, this sort of stuff. This is why it takes me a long time to write a book. That and the size, but yeah. So anyway, read and then write, and the last rule is the most important. Don't stop. Because people stop all the time. They get frustrated, they get upset. They have a bad week. They say, oh, my mind is like cement, I can't do anything. Never throw anything away either, but that's a footnote, not a rule. Yeah, when you throw things away, you feel frustrated and like you're not getting anywhere. This is not true. Every word you write will help you be a better writer, whether it makes it into your final thing or not, whether you have thrown away 3,000 words. Essentially. I never throw anything away. When I delete something out of a scene that I'm writing, I drop it down to the bottom of the file and just leave it sitting there. And then when I put the pieces together, I could have taken those out and put them in a different file called ORTS, O-R-T-S. It's a crossword puzzle type of word. It means fragments of food that fall from the table. So anyway, save your ORTS. You can always rebake them into something else. Or I go back sometimes and look for an idea or a turn of phrase that I know I wrote, and sure enough, it's in the ORTS, and I can use that as the kernel for something else. Let's see. We are coming down on it, so let me see if there's anything else that I meant to tell you. Oh, why Scotland? Aside from, well, yes, you already know why not Mexico, but why not? What I learned from my research earlier and then from contact with actual Scots and so forth is that Scots are, and historically have been, very literate. They wrote down things from a very distant past. I was just in the library here, and they were showing me, I was up in the collections department, they were showing me their Shakespearean first folio and the original John James Audubon Birds of North America with the original paintings and things like that. Totally cool stuff, but they had much, much older stuff written by Scottish authors. They went back to like the 1400s, the 1300s, and so forth. And I have a number of old books from back then too. No, they wrote things down in all parts of Scotland. Children in the Highlands were sent to school. They might be very poor, but they sent their kids to school and taught them to read. So this means that there was a lot of history available, and I was writing historical fiction, so I wanted a place with a lot of history. But a lot of it was still available. It was written down, and if it had been written by Scots, so much the better, because I needed to learn how Scottish people talked in order to make this sound like a reasonable proposition. So people often ask me, how did you get the brogue? Is always how they put it. It's not called the brogue, meaning, I suppose, the sort of general purpose Scots that I use in the books. To which the answer is simple. I read everything I could get my hands on written by a Scot. Ian Rankin, Irvin Welsh, who is a fascinating writer, but he does write in a modern Edinburghian patois, which is not something I ever planned to use. Let's see, Andrew Grieg, Lady Antonia Fraser, Dorothy Dunnett, ditto with the language. She writes stuff set in the 1300s and so forth. But whenever I met an actual Scottish person at an academic conference, I would listen to them for a minute to make sure they were Scottish, and I would sort of sidle up to them and say, let me buy you a coffee, I want to listen to you talk. Well, if it was a man, this always worked, but others I'm not so sure. I didn't meet that many women because they weren't working in my field. Anyway, also I would listen to Scottish bands on DVDs. It was CDs back then, so forth, especially the Corries and other Scottish bands, both for the lyrics of the songs, which were good, but also because the bands will usually banter back and forth with each other and the audience during the interval, so I could pick up, how their local accents sounded, and then I could break that down. Okay, as well as being a very literate nation, the Scots had and have a strong oral culture. They told their stories. And then there's the nature of Scottish history, which is the last thing. It has a lot of heroes and heroines and a lot of very grim stuff, which is full of conflict. And conflict, of course, is what you need for a good story. Yeah, you don't. I get letters all the time from people who say, "Oh, I want to write a novel that's based on my grandmother's life," and they tell me all of the high points of their grandmother's life, which basically amount to where she was born, how many children she had, and how many husbands she had before she died at the age of 94. I'm saying, well, this is good, but you know, where exactly is the point of conflict? Now, if you're going to explain why she had more than one husband, that might be worth telling, but otherwise, maybe not. Okay, so. See. Oh, and that's, the main reason is that Scotland, speaking generally, of course, has a lot of courage and a major league sense of humor, and also, of course, kilts. Thanks. Yeah, I was, well, some of the actors on the Outlander show were very interested in the question of Scottish independence, and they came out publicly to say so, so I'm not, you know, giving away anything that should be kept private and so forth. But I was talking to Sam Hewen about this right after he had publicly declared that, and I said to him, you know, just looking at the general history of Scotland, they haven't been able to get along with each other long enough to get anything accomplished for the last 400 years. Do you think you're going to manage now? Apparently the answer was no. But you know, we were teasing. But you know, there is a lot of conflict, and people are very very stubborn and hold to their own opinions, which is, I think, an admirable trait. Yeah. But anyway, that's why Scotland and why not Mexico. So thank you very much for bearing with me so far. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Diana Gabaldon. Give her another round of applause.
Thank you.
And that was a wonderful lecture, and I'm sure you'll all have lots of questions, and I've got a couple of mics. If anyone does have any questions, stick up your hand and we'll get your mics down to you, so I'll get the first mic down to you. And while we're doing that, I'm going to ask a question. First of all, I'm going to take the opportunity, and I suppose that is based on kind of historical fiction and historical people and fiction, and where there is a blur about what is important to keep and what's important, what you can discard. About, I'm sure you know there's a lot of talk about depictions of Bonnie Prince Charlie or specific battle and so on. So, as a writer, what leads you to give a particular picture of a person, and how then you deal with people saying, but he wasn't like that, or he was like that.
Yes, they will.
So can you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I can. No, that's a particular problem that is peculiar to historical fiction alone, where you're actually dealing with historical characters, with real people. I mean, if it's a fictional character, you can pretty much do anything you want. Historical people, I think you owe a debt to the past in some ways, and respect for the dead person. So what I do is I read everything I can find that that person wrote, if they wrote anything, because they come through very clearly in what they write, and which is why people save documents and things like that. I also read biographies of them. While those are, of course, not written by the person themselves, they're usually written by someone who is extremely passionate about them and has gone to the trouble of ferreting out every last detail they could find. And so you read more than one of those, because people don't always have the same manias, and therefore they're not looking at the same details. But if you read, say, 3 reasonably good historical accounts of a person or a battle or something like that, you're probably going to get a reasonably well-rounded depiction. You're never going to know that person, you know, intimately. They're not around to talk to you and tell you, but you can build something that looks like them, that has an error of theirs, that has their attitude toward life, situation, or whatever. And then I read everything that they wrote, from letters to books, if they wrote any, and so forth, and can pick up a sense of their personality from that. But my rule of thumb when dealing with a historical person is not to show them as doing anything worse than the worst thing I know they did, because we try not to malign people. But some people did some very bad things, and I think it's perfectly legitimate to talk about that. As for Bonnie Prince Charlie, he is very controversial for assorted reasons, but one of those is that he didn't really write anything other than short social notes and so forth. He didn't make proclamations or write books or anything like that. So there's very little of his own personality left for us to judge from. So we're left with what other people thought about him, which of course was highly colored by their own political beliefs, and also the thing to ask then is, did this person actually know Bonnie Prince Charlie, or does he just know him, ex post facto, or at a remove because, they heard about this fellow over in Scotland who had arrived to cause trouble and so forth? Well, that's worth knowing, but it's not going to help you with your depiction of Bonnie Prince Charlie. So, owing to the very dramatic circumstances of the Battle of Culloden and the collapse of the Stuart cause and all that, a lot of interest was generated for that particular time period, that cause, and for the Stuarts in general. So you get people asking and looking. A lot of what's published about him is, well, all of it is third hand. It's not based on him. It's not based on his writings, not based on people who knew him. It's collected stuff from third-hand people, some of whom were very good. I read a number of these, and I picked the one that I thought had the best documentation and explicated him more fully than most of the others, and was based on the author, whose name is Susan McLean Kybett, Kybett, and her book is called Bonnie Prince Charlie, as most of them are. But she had based her research on 6 years of going through the Stuart papers in London. And I said, well, that seems like reasonably good scholarship to me. And what she said made sense in the terms of what else I knew about the period and so forth. So I took that as sort of my rule of thumb reference and put the others aside. But it's, it's choice.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a questioner here, Jackie, and I'll pass this on as well.
Thanks, Caleb Breacher. Is it switched on? Right. Outlander's been ongoing 30 years, and we've all followed Jamie and Claire across to America. We're looking at them there. Do they come back to Scotland, and is there ever an end in sight? Is this going to, I know you've said that, the last book is 10, that's it. Is it branching off into other places? Is there scope for it to be more?
Well, the thing is, I don't plan the books out before I write them, because this would not be fun. And I don't write in a straight line either. I write in bits and pieces where I can see things happening, and I do research at the same time as the writing, so the research will suddenly suggest something to me, and I'll think, oh, well, maybe they did that. And I'll write that and then think, well, does this fit here? Well, no, it doesn't, so it must fit over there. Things like that. So there's a lot of juggling going on, so I can't, at this point, tell you exactly what's in Book 10. I kind of intend it to be the last because I'm 71, I don't know how long I'm going to last, and I would like to make sure that the book series ends in good order, and I don't say that you're going to get total closure on everything, but we ought to be able to close at least 90% of it and tuck in a few of the loose ends kind of thing. The other thing is that I have never known whether the book I'm working on is the last one. I thought Outlander was going to be the only book, and then it wasn't. And then I thought, well, Voyager was going to be the last book, and then it wasn't, and so forth and so on. So, at the moment, I think it's going to be the last one, but, my mind could be changed depending on how far we get in it. Yeah.
Hi. Did you have a set of criteria when you made decisions about letting another entity put your work on the screen?
No. I wouldn't call it criteria exactly. I'm not sure how to explain this. Movie and TV works on an option system, meaning if someone wants to make a movie of your book, they will come to you and offer you a modest amount of money for an option. And then only if they get everything put together, which is a lot of financing on their part, and put together production, all this is a big thing. If they can manage to do that, then the option contract arranges for the sale. So if you agree to an option and they pull everything together, you can't stop them from buying it. But they have to pay you the amount that was in the contract, but you can't stop them from buying it. which means that you had better investigate them carefully before you start. But if they haven't made a big thing before, nothing that you're familiar with, how are you going to know if they're any good? You have to ask after their reputation. Have they been in business for a long time? I talk to people whom I know and say, who might move in such circles, and I say, have you ever heard of so-and-so? What have you heard about them? That kind of thing. But it all comes down essentially to personalities. Do you trust this person or these people to do the best that they can with whatever it is? Now, with regard to Outlander, that has been optioned 5 times before Stars came along. At that point, Stars was looking quite good, in terms of they were well established. They had a lot of work out. It was all, reasonably coherent and so forth. They knew what they were doing, and I had a fair amount of faith that they could, in fact, pull it off. So then it became a matter of the people. Well, that was Ron, the showrunner, and his partner, Merrill Davis, was the other showrunner. They came out to my house in Scottsdale and spent 2 days with me going over what they thought about the book. They showed me their pilot script and described why they had taken these various steps. And Ron said to me, he said, I know how the book starts, and, it's very magnetic, it flows beautifully, but it's slow for a movie. He said, if anything on film, something has to happen within 30 seconds or you've lost them. And he said, so what I'd like to do is start the book with a little visual prequel of Claire, in the military hospital during World War II. I want to show her, stopping bleeding, saving lives, and so forth, being Claire, doing what we most identify Claire as being and doing, and that will rivet people's attention, and then we can go on with unfolding the story. And I was going, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, so anyway, we got along. We were pretty much on the same wavelength regarding storytelling and Outlander. You're always going to run into the basic physical, logistical situation, which is that it's a very big book, and the show is only so many hours long. You cannot put even 1/10 of one of those books into that size of a season. So they have to pick and choose very carefully which pieces they're going to use. Sometimes there would be pieces that I really wish they could use, but I can see why they don't. And other times they will write something else of their own, and I'm thinking, why did you do that? But it is essentially their show. The contract called for them to make me a consultant, and they did. I asked my agent, I said, what does that actually mean? What do I have to do? And he said, well, it varies. He said, chances are they just want you to go away and not bother them, and they'll pay you a certain amount as a consultant. He said, if you get along well with them and they decide they do want to work with you, then they'll tell you what they want you to do. So I am a consultant on the show. I do get along with them, and they show me everything. I see all of the scripts and their iterations. Every script goes through at least 8 rewrites before it goes into more rewrites while they're filming it, but mostly. And they show me all of the dailies, as they call them, which used to be called footage, but is now pixelage. But they send me, 5 days a week, they send me a set of little mini movies, which are the various takes of a scene, which are fascinating to watch because you see just different things. Sometimes a scene will be going, yay, and then suddenly one of the actors will get a bright idea, or the director will, I suppose, and do it completely differently, and you're going, oh, that worked, And, you always have the funny things that happen, like when Sam, lifts Claire's, apparently wounded and lifeless body and shouts, "Bring me Denzel Washington!" Having obviously forgotten that it was Dr. Hunter that he was calling for. But I mean, how many Denzels do you meet in daily life? But that's never showing up anywhere except possibly on a blooper reel. In fact, I'm sure it will show up on a blooper reel. Exactly.
Much. And we've
Thank you
just
so
got time
much.
for 2 more questions.
Oh, good.
And you've both got the microphone, so we'll go to yourself first.
Hi. I had a question about, this is a pretty good follow-up to that, what you were just talking about, I think. But is there any scene that you saw in the show where you just wanted to jump up and go, yes, they nailed it. The actor nailed a scene. Is there
several
one?
of them, yeah.
Yeah. Is there one that comes to mind?
Well, yes, but it's one from season 7, and they haven't shown it yet, so I shouldn't tell you. I can't tell you that it was, yeah, really, yeah. Well, I can't tell you that it was one involving, a very important moment from the show, not plot-wise, but emotionally important and so forth. And Sam was one of the participants in this, and of course there were 4 people present who were saying and doing different things and all that. But then at the end, Sam comes toward the camera, and Claire asks him, "Why did you do that?" And he tells her in some detail. So they did it like 13 times, and I was going, yeah, okay, good, no, yeah, that looks good. But then Sam just got something else suddenly, and he came out and he just delivered it in a completely different way with different acting, and I was going yeah. And just as I was thinking this, I heard one of the assistant directors in the background saying very quietly, "Smashed it, smashed it." Which was funny, because I was talking to Sam himself about it the next day. I said, "You just did a fabulous job there." And he said, "Oh, I don't think so." And he's always very modest about it. He said, "I really would have liked to have more takes on that. I thought there was more I could get out of it." And I told him, no, what the ADA said. And he was sort of like, "Ooh, really? Oh, wow. Well, I'm sure it was somebody else."
Going to finish off with one more question.
I just think you look great for 71, so I think all these guys in kilts are making you look younger every day. And I know you mentioned J.K. Rowling in the beginning. I wonder if you met her. I met her when I was in Atlanta, Georgia, at the very early stages of her writing a book.
Oh, yeah.
And we're playing the bagpipes, and I said, "I know they think you're Scottish, but you're English, So we had a wee chat. Her arm was all wrapped up with a bandage from signing so many things. I just wonder if you've had the privilege of meeting her.
No, I haven't. I would like to meet her someday.
She's just along the road. She's not that far.
Oh, yeah, I could go knock,
Hey, I know she'd love to have you. like I know her, but of course she would. Anyway, you look great.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
That's great, and thank you very much. And I think, sadly, we don't have any more time for questions at the moment, but we will have questions and lots of time to talk and debate and listen to wonderful talks during the week. And Diana's going to be here tonight and tomorrow, so there will be opportunities to talk to Diana. And I'm sure
yeah,
Diana...
if you see me around, just walk up and say so.
Indeed. So one more thing just to say. I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful week, but I'm sure you'll all agree that the conference couldn't really have got off to a better start than the wonderful lecture from Dr. Diana Gabaldon, so please give it a huge round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
So we're now free to go, and I'm sure we'll see you at lots of events, wonderful events during the week. As I mentioned, during the day, talks, lectures, roundtables, but also cookery demonstrations, whiskey tasting, night at the museum, a concert on Thursday, Cayley on Friday, and lots to do in Glasgow and in the university during the week. So have a wonderful time, and I'll see you during the week. Thank you. Thank you.